Now excited to be joined by a very special guest. It is Justin Hokanson, who covers all things Auburn for On3. Justin, be honest with me. When I tweeted last week that Auburn hadn't beat a Power 5 team who finished with a winning record since October 30th, 2021, and that it had gone 0-17 in those matchups since then, you fact-checked me, right?
Well, I knew that. I was very aware. Of they hadn't beat a ranked team since Ole Miss. I had not gone and looked at how many they played since then. So I guess so being 0-17 since then is pretty surprising. I didn't know they had played that many ranked teams in that time span. But I definitely was very aware that Ole Miss was the last time they won a ranked game. And shoot, I mean, trying to even think back to 2020, which was COVID. First game, Kentucky might have been preseason top 25. Maybe. But I mean, even that season, I don't know. I mean, I think they may have upset A&M. I don't know if they were like even that season. I'm not sure. Kentucky might have been a preseason top because that was the first game of the year in that COVID. But yeah, I was aware of the Ole Miss thing, and I agreed with the reason I retweeted it. I said this has got to change is because it's one of the talking points of people that I talk to, not just fans but donors. When people ask what's a successful season for Auburn next year, I'm like, it's sort of two-sided. A better record than 6-6 is one part, like go up in wins. But it's also what I hear from donors is like beat somebody, be competitive. Don't get close, like get over the hump. Like if they go 6-6 next year and beat, now this would be weird if they went 6-6 and beat Oklahoma. That means they're losing to somebody they shouldn't. So it'd be more like if they go 7-5. And one of those 7 is beating Oklahoma or something like that, that's a big step forward. So it's, yes, they want to see more wins, obviously, but it's beat somebody legit. Like actually get over the hump and show that you can compete and beat a ranked team.
Yeah, just so I'm clear, because I might have butchered that. It's 0-17 against teams who have Power 5 teams who have finished with a winning record.
Oh, okay, that makes more sense.
So even more like it's so you're talking about not even beating decent teams, and then when the New Mexico State losses, like things like that happen, it kind of puts things in perspective even more. But it's kind of crazy because you mentioned how close you can be in those games, and I think even for somebody like myself, I didn't realize that until looking it up, because when you play Georgia and you play Alabama competitively, it doesn't feel like a team that's not necessarily in those places to be able to get those quality wins. But you're right. I mean, it just feels like, man, you have to be able to beat those teams that actually matter. Let's talk about Hugh Freeze and what he said with Cole and Greg about Payton Thorne, a comment that has kind of made the rounds the last couple of days here. Freeze said he didn't want to spend $1 million on a quarterback and that he would rather develop, Thorne and the rest of the quarterbacks in that room, which, had a lot of reaction, understandably so. What was your reaction to that decision? Not so much the comment, because obviously the decision was pretty much made in early December.
Yeah, the comment is not shocking. That's something that I'd heard going back to the winter portal. I mean, I talked about it when Riley Leonard hit the portal. I told our people from day one, listen, his approach, especially to quarterback, is he's just conservative on NIL right now. Like he's a little stubborn in giving in and paying any player a lot of money. He thinks about culture. He thinks about locker room. He's trying to build this thing from the ground up, high school wise, in his locker room. And he's just very, I think, nervous to play the NIL game and just bring whoever in and then try to manage a guy coming in and feeling entitled or whatever. Like, obviously, you're going to play the portal game, but a quarterback's different. They're demanding more money. They're going to come in thinking they should start. And so it's just, he was already a little hesitant about that. And so the fact that he said he didn't want to pay a guy, that's not surprising. That's kind of what happened with Riley Leonard. That was pretty close to happening. And then they demanded a certain number that he was like, we're not doing it. As far as kind of his comments about Payton Thorne, I mean, he's been honest about that. Like, you go back to now after the bowl game, he was very much, we got to reassess things and I'm not happy. And I think he felt pressure from boosters. Like after the bowl game, it was like, we got to go get somebody. But I think he just sort of evaluated a little bit more, looked at the NIL thing. He just couldn't get over the hump to trying to pay a player. And I think he also reevaluated last year what a lot of people, I think Auburn fans sort of know, but even I don't think people have a full grasp of how dysfunctional the offense was last season. And I'm not making an excuse for Payton Thorne, but there was no offensive identity. I mean, most of the time during a week, there was no real playbook. It would just be week from week to week, like, what are we doing this week? And then within the same game, you'd have two guys calling plays. Within the same series, you could have Freeze interjecting himself calling plays. You had a rotation of quarterbacks. I mean, it was a difficult situation for Payton Thorne to excel in. I mean, that's just a fact. That's true. And so I think evaluating who Payton was last year is difficult. You kind of got to go back to what Freeze mentions a lot, and I think is fair, is look at Payton's best season at Michigan State when he had some really good receivers, a couple that are in the NFL right now. He was really good. And you might say, well, duh. If you have NFL receivers, you're going to be good. Well, yeah. Duh. Like, and sometimes that's what it is. Like, a quarterback's good when he's got good players, and he's not as good when he doesn't. So I think they just decided, look, I think Payton's got the intelligence, he's got the skills and the athletic ability to run this offense. I'd rather devote money to Keandre Lambert-Smith or like whatever. I need to build around him and stick with Payton versus go get a quarterback to bring him in. The dynamic of the quarterback room changes, and I still haven't upgraded at receiver or whatever it might be. So he just made that decision and says, if I build up, I think Payton can win us football games. And he rolled the dice. We'll know more this year, truly, about what kind of quarterback Payton can be, because I think the offensive identity and everything behind the scenes will be a lot more cohesive than it was last year.
You mentioned Riley Leonard, Grayson McCall, Cam Ward, Will Howard. Which one of those had any shot of happening at Auburn?
Cam Ward, they were after, but again, that was an NIL thing where everything I was hearing was there was just not a comfort level with what he wanted. Like, what Cam Ward was demanding, it just was not something that Freeze and those guys were comfortable doing. Grayson McCall was a guy that very probably would have happened last year, but there was some academic things and going from Coastal, and it didn't work. And then I think this year, a year later, it was sort of a different dynamic, and I didn't hear his name much. But that was very close to happening a year ago. But this time around, I mean, outside of Riley Leonard, they didn't flirt with as many. I mean, Caden Salter from Liberty was like, hey, could he maybe come over? I know a year ago they thought, was Michael Pratt going to enter the portal? Like, there were different guys, but after Leonard kind of didn't go that way, I just never got the sense that they really made a strong push for anybody in particular. And a lot of it just came back to looking at it going, we're going to bring in a guy and we're going to pay him what? Hugh, that's still a struggle for him. And I think he couldn't quite get over that hump in terms of paying so then you're like, okay, well, what would you be comfortable paying? You go down the line. Well, now I'm going to go get a guy that doesn't demand as much, but he's probably not the caliber of player. Well, why would I bring him into the room? And he also didn't want to have 5 quarterbacks. He's got Payton Thorne, he's got Holden Gerner, he's got Hank Brown, and now he's got Walker White. He doesn't want 5 quarterbacks in the room. That was another issue. If somebody had decided to transfer, it would have maybe made sense to bring somebody in, but he really didn't want 5 quarterbacks in that room.
I do think, though, the post-spring year one quarterback transfers, you're set up to fail. You really are, and it's not an ideal time to be able to hit the market. And for those saying that everything that Payton Thorne did last year was a direct result of him and him only, I would say, not necessarily. But you would hope that those guys, the Will Levises of the world, who he made that decision early in spring but didn't get to arrive on campus until after he graduated, and then a Joe Burrow, like, you saw the improvement down the stretch. You didn't necessarily see that improvement with Payton Thorne and some of the things that still felt like were so limited in that offense. Freeze has always had that year 2 guy, though. Like, his starters are always like second-year guys. How much do you think that factored in, and how much do you think that could possibly set up someone like Hank Brown to come in and set up and potentially be the guy if we get another scenario in which Payton Thorne doesn't cut it?
Yeah, it's a fair point. I think the offense as a whole started to tick up at the end of the year, but part of that was they had a run against Mississippi State, Arkansas, and Vanderbilt, and so of course it looked better. And then they played well against Alabama, right? Like, that game they should have won. But I still go back to when we're sort of like what you said about, did we see Payton get better? Yes and no. Like I thought his operation of things got better. I mean, if you really, really dug into like his last 6 games or so and looked at what he did and said, okay, we'll give him 25 passes a game. He only threw 13 or 14 or 15. Give him 25. His numbers were pretty good. He just didn't have the quantity in some of those games to even throw. They were running the ball and he'd run the ball. And so it was a little bit difficult to sort of evaluate. I thought he played fairly well. The bowl game was just a mess. But there's a lot of reasons that go into that. But again, I just go back to the disjointed nature of the offense last year in the game planning and the preparation. I just think Philip Montgomery's a good play caller, but there was not the preparation behind the scenes with the quarterbacks the way that there needed to be. And it was just kind of messy. And so I think Freeze taking over play calling for the most part. Derek Nix comes in. They've run things together. Ken Austin's your quarterback coach. They've all been together. Ken Austin and Payton Thorne have a fantastic relationship. There is a lot more cohesion there. And now it's on Payton. The cohesion's there. The identity is going to be there. You got Cam Coleman. You got Keandre Lambert-Smith. You've got Rivaldo Fairweather. You've got Jarquez Hunter. Offensive line's decent. Now it's kind of on Payton. Everything's there to be good. As far as Hank Brown, good player, young player, kind of a gamer, but I don't think he's there yet. Like it's Payton's job completely until he goes out there and doesn't perform. If he goes out there first couple of games, I mean, non-conference games, they host Cal, but you won't really know what this team's about till Oklahoma. They play, well, I mean, you got Arkansas at home, but that'll tell us a little bit. Oklahoma will tell us a lot. So if Payton goes out there and plays well, it's his job. He would have to go out there and really perform poorly for them to go, okay, that's not great. Do we need to reassess? I mean, Hank's got some sort of raw ability, but he's not there yet. Holden doesn't have the mobility. That hurts you. And Walker's not. Walker's he's a true freshman. He's not there yet either. So Payton needs to be the man. Hank's got some skills, but he doesn't have nearly the experience that Payton does. So I think it's Payton's job, and I think he probably has a pretty decent leash just because of the talent and experience gap combined is pretty big, I think.
I was going to set the over-under at 1.5 Hank Brown starts for you this season. Will you take the over-under on that?
I would take the under. I think Payton would have to it would have to be an epic collapse for them to pull him. Because if you do, first of all, you're going to be a handful of games into the season before you realize, okay, Payton's not getting the job. You're going to give him a chance. By then you're into the SEC. And I don't know, man. I think it would have to be an epic collapse. And I think Payton's a good player. I think Payton's very smart, and I think he's a really good athlete. I think he's a good enough player to make this offense go. I think he'll perform fairly well. Could Hank get some snaps at times? Yeah, but I don't think Hank. I think Payton will be the guy, the starter every game. I do. If he's not, then the season's going to be it's going to be a problem.
I liked the approach that Hugh had in the portal with the receiver position of not just saying, oh, well, we got Cam Coleman, we got this young group of receivers, we're going to be good. The addition of Keandre Lambert-Smith, I think, was really important. Something that I talked about a few weeks ago on the show, but it just felt like last year's passing game desperately lacked the things that he does well, the interchangeable ability, veteran presence, can kind of do, things a little bit with a little bit more variety than I think this offense had at times last year. What type of presence do you expect him to be able to bring to that room?
Yeah, that was a big one. And you sort of have to keep it in perspective. Nobody's saying Keandre Lambert-Smith's an All-American. But he's really good. But for Auburn, he's huge. And for Auburn, he's huge. Cam Coleman's got all this ability, but putting all the pressure on Cam Coleman as a true freshman is just not – very few true freshmen can just come in, be the only real threat, and just dominate. That's just very unlikely. And so the addition of somebody like Keandre Lambert-Smith, who's not only talented and a playmaker and can make things happen after the catch, he's got experience, he's a veteran. Just having one other legitimate option at receiver is so big for Payton. It's big so that defenses can't just go, well, look, guys, they got Cam. That's the only person we got to worry about over the top is Cam. Well, now, no, you do have another guy you have to respect. And then you think about somebody like Robert Lewis from Georgia State, who's a good player in the slot. I think a guy that you're going to be able to rely on, a smart player in the slot. Even somebody like Sam Jackson from Cal, we'll see how he kind of comes on, but he's really dynamic when he gets the ball. But just one more guy on the outside is such a big deal for this offense, a big deal for Payton, and might free things up for Cam. And hopefully he brings some veteran presence as well to sort of help Cam become a better player. But it's funny, now they're going to go into the season with, I think, two guys, Cam Coleman and Keandre Lambert-Smith, that, if you're in trouble, you could kind of just throw in their direction and they're decent chance they'll make a play. I don't even know. I mean, you'd have to go back to Seth Williams in 2019, when you had a guy that you could kind of just toss it up that would make a play. I mean, it just doesn't happen a lot. Before that, maybe Darius Slayton in 17. There just hasn't been a bunch of guys, and I think Auburn might have two. And I don't know the last time they had a pair, maybe Slayton and Ryan Davis in 2017, but pretty rare when I think they've got two guys that are going to be pretty good and will be guys that Payton Thorne can rely on in a tough situation.
It's probably pretty hard to keep expectations in check with a guy named Cam on the Plains. Difficult thing to do. Is there a guy that he kind of reminds you of so far that doesn't feel like it's totally crazy to throw out there?
Oh my gosh. I don't know. Covering Auburn, I don't see a lot of studs at receiver, as you can imagine. So I don't know. He's just the one thing that stands out about him is like everybody can look at him and go, "Oh, he looks great." Like he's tall, he strides really well, he's well built. The thing that stands out when you watch him in practice a little bit, and you saw it in A-Day, like the catch, one of the touchdowns he makes, the corner is in great position. He keeps his eye on the ball and he catches it sort of the guys all over him and he makes the catch. The other one he lays out. The one thing that Hugh talked about that you can't sort of really know until you start to see it is his ball skills. He says he tracks the ball and catches the ball and sort of knows when to jump and knows how to position himself as good as anybody that he's seen. And those are the things that you can't always know in high school. Maybe it's the talent level, whatever. You get him on campus and you're like, man, he tracks it really well. And his hands are out and he reaches out. It's the little things that make great receivers, not the physical tools. And that's what he seems to already show. And so I don't know about comparing him to anybody. He kind of looks like, I hate comparisons. He's sort of, if I had to say who's the first person he sort of looks like, it'd be like AJ Green, like lean, tall, but can also run, good ball skills. Like that's the sort of type player he looks like. Can he be that? Who knows? But he sort of looks like that guy, a leaner guy. He's not, Julio was big and physical. Julio looked like a freaking defensive end sometimes, but AJ was sort of that lean guy, but could make every catch. Cam sort of looks like that when you watch him.
I thought the smartest thing that Hugh did last year was, as painful as it was for people that had to watch it, especially in person like you did, but was just not totally abandon the passing game, because you can't overhaul your receiver room and get those guys if you're operating like a service academy. You just can't. How different should this offense look now that he feels like he has more of that type of personnel that he wants in there, especially with that run-pass balance, knowing this is year 2 with Payton Thorne, make of that what you will. But how different will this offense look with that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll help. He wants to take some more shots, and I don't think they could do enough of that. Obviously, they'll still run the ball. Rivaldo Fairweather is going to be a really important piece. He's got to be a little more consistent. There's games where he dropped some easy passes, and there's games where he made some great catches. But I think just the ability to try to get downfield a little bit. I mean, there's parts – I mean, once you got into last year, I mean, you go back and look, and the thought of taking a shot downfield was almost pointless. They just did not have anybody that you could rely on to say, hey, let's take a shot. Back shoulder throws were like almost a wasted down. I remember being at the LSU game and watching them early in the game try to throw some back shoulders to some guys, and it was like completely pointless. I mean, the receivers couldn't make the play. There wasn't good chemistry there. There's just no threat downfield, none. I mean, any thought of trying to go downfield was almost a desperation type play. So to me, it's just trying to get downfield a little bit more, but now having a couple of guys that you feel like you can rely on a little bit more to make a play. You've got a little more confidence calling those plays. So I think that's going to be the challenge. I mean, obviously in that RPO stuff, you'll run the screens and you'll run the slants and stuff like that. But can they get downfield more where Cam just makes a play? or Keandre Lambert-Smith catches a dig route and can turn and run after the catch. Those are the things that I think they need is the bigger plays, because they couldn't execute their way down the field. They didn't have that kind of ability. So that you need those big plays nowadays. And so that'll probably be the biggest difference. It got to the point last year was like, they didn't even really try downfield. It was pointless. Everything was short, didn't go anywhere, and it was just kind of a lost cause.
I'd like to think that Freeze in that pitch to Lambert Smith said, hey, you know how you just came from a place where James Franklin publicly shamed throwing deep? I promise I'll get you at least 3 deep targets per game. And I don't even care if it's not even close. We're just going to at least look your way downfield for the sake of doing that, because Auburn desperately, they need something like that. Him taking over play calling duties is one of the more interesting storylines, I think, early on in the SEC this year. But it's an interesting conversation with patience versus panic, because he's a year removed from getting up at SEC Media Days and saying, you know what, I don't think I'm one of the premier play callers in the sport like I once was. And he's going back on that. Part of me wonders how much he thinks about the fact that his predecessor was fired Halloween weekend year 2. And he's looking at this going, man, I got to be able to show that I know what I'm doing on that side of the ball, because that's why I was brought in. How much do you think that factored into that decision, or any of the personnel decisions that he made going into this season?
Yeah, it was an interesting deal, because the other part of what he talked about when he first arrived was, he said, with how college football's changed and the importance of NIL and the importance of where our roster is and getting it back to where it needs to be, he thought, I need to focus more on recruiting, and I need to hire an OC, and I need that guy to be the OC, and I need to focus solely for at least the first year, if it would have worked out maybe longer, on recruiting, roster, getting to know NIL, figuring out what we can do and what we can't do. And so that was kind of his reasoning for not being the OC. A lot of his reasoning for hiring an OC. He thought he needed to be more of a CEO. And really early in the season, game 1, game 2, he was very open about saying, I'm struggling. I'm struggling with not being more involved. I'm struggling with letting somebody completely run it, and I don't really know all that terminology, so I don't want to get involved and make things more complicated, but I want to be involved. And then, of course, it got to the point where he felt like he needed to get involved, but he's very open about, hey, I'm struggling with this now. And so I think it's probably a combination of being a year in the program, probably felt like he sort of had a grasp of sort of recruiting, roster, NIL, sort of what that looked like, and now maybe I go back to being OC. The other thing I think is, think about who he brought in, Derek Nix. Think about who he promoted, Ken Austin. The other part of what he did offseason was he wasn't comfortable last year, not just in the play calling OC situation. He wasn't completely comfortable, I don't think, with the staff, which can happen first year. And so you look at who he brought in, Nix, who he knew before, promotes Ken Austin, brings back Maurice Harris, who's now an analyst from Liberty. He brought guys, promotes Vontrell King-Williams, who was at Liberty and who was already on staff. He very much wanted to build this second staff on just complete comfort. He wanted to feel like he knew them all and he's coached with them all, and there's going to be zero lost in translation in terms of his messaging. And I'm not saying that did or didn't happen last year, but clearly there was a discomfort with him. So that, I think, factored in too about his change in philosophy on OC, was bringing Derek Nix in, who he's completely comfortable with, and knowing that he can get involved in there, and it should be a good situation. But yeah, I think it's going to be interesting to see. I mean, technically Derek Nix is the play caller, right? We went through all that with Lane Kiffin and his public tweeting, but Freeze is going to be, I think, the primary play caller during the games, and Nix will be the coordinator and will certainly be a part of it. But I have to think that Freeze is going to be the primary play caller during the games. Yeah.
Is Rhett Lashley the last returning play caller or returning offensive coordinator at Auburn? Is that right?
Probably, man. You go back to 17 was Chip Lindsey, 18 was Chip Lindsey.
What about Dillingham in there? Was he 19?
Dillingham was there. That was, I think, that was 19. So I think they went Chip Lindsey, 17, 18, Dillingham, but Malzahn took back play calling in 19 with Bo Nix as a freshman. And then it was Malzahn in 20, and then you get into the Harsin, And then it was I can't even remember who his first OC was. Yeah, Keesaw the second year. The first year was Bobo. Yeah, Bobo 21, Keesaw 22, Montgomery 23. Yeah, and I mean, so you have to go back to 17, 18 was the last time you had consecutive OC calling plays in 2 seasons. It's been that's why you look at like Bo Nix when he was here and then he goes to Oregon. He had like 5 OCs, and so it's just been. Offense at Auburn has been difficult, man, since 2017. And really, 17 was a great year. 16 was a bunch of good running, but not good passing. 15 was a mess. Then you go back to 14 with Nick Marshall was a pretty good – 14 and 13 with Nick Marshall. Whatever. But you're talking about 10 years, you could probably go – if you included 13, you're talking about 3. I think 3 seasons that of a high-level offensive, unit. 3 in 11 seasons.
It's crazy to think about that turnover. It's not ideal. It is definitely not ideal.
No.
I'll get you out of here with this one. I set the Auburn ceiling at 8-4 because of that aforementioned stat about beating teams at the Power 5 level who finished with a winning record. But you kind of look at it and you're like, all right, well, the decade that you just brought up, it's an Auburn team that's got 4 losses in each of those seasons during the 14 playoff era. I won't ask you to set a ceiling from a win-loss standpoint, but what is your expectation? Where do you kind of set the line at for this group?
I'm probably with you. I would debate. I think the floor is 6-6. The floor has got to be. Cannot go lower than that. Auburn should never be lower than that. Like they should be higher than that anyway. But I think they're 6-6. I mean, you got 4 non-conference games. Cal at home. You should win those. You've got Vanderbilt at home. You got Arkansas at home. That's 6. I think no, anything can happen. We saw New Mexico State, but that's 6, and then you get into Oklahoma at home, which they'll, I think right now it's an early kind of 3-point spread. You got A&M at home; it's kind of an early 3-point spread. Auburn the underdog in both of those. Those are toss-ups. Kentucky on the road, probably a toss-up. So, like I'd say, there's I think 6 is a good number, and then there's 3 that I think they'll probably be just a slight underdog, but they could win. Win them all, you're at 9. Win 1, you're at 7. Win 2, you're at 8. So, I think that's fair. Missouri, pretty good team. That's tough. Bama, Georgia, it gets tough. But I mean, I think there's 6 is the floor, and I think you're looking at if you pull just 1 upset, you're at 7. If you pull 2 upsets, you're at 8. Oklahoma, Texas A&M game. I don't know that those teams are that much better than where Auburn is right now. I mean, they might be a little bit better, but I don't. At home, Auburn absolutely could win either one of those games. So I think 9 would be like ultimate ceiling. That's asking them to win all 6 and then win 3 more games that they're probably the underdog in. That's pretty tough for any team. So there's no way you can go above 9. I think 8's probably a more realistic ceiling.
That's a very fair answer, I think, all things considered. Justin, great stuff, man. We'll do it again sometime soon.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it.